Serious, what dark family secret were you let in on once you were old enough? My parents took me to Disneyland for my 7th birthday. I recall landing, going to the park, having a great first day or two. Then my parents had to step out and take a bunch of phone calls. They sounded very stressed. They kept telling me nothing happened and everything was okay. Eventually we flew home, and surprise. Took an extra couple days to go to a big water park away from home. I fondly remembered this birthday and eventually forgot about any of the weirdness. Maybe 10 years later my parents finally told me what happened. My uncle, my dad's brother, tried to kill himself on my 7th birthday. He shot himself in the stomach with a rifle. He was poor, addicted to drugs, no work, etc. He felt depressed that my dad had the life he always wanted, so tried to kill himself. He ended up living. My parents took me to the water park so that we didn't have to come home after he left the hospital. By not telling me, my parents let me keep my birthday as my day, not the day Uncle tried to die. Knowing how a 7-year-old's brain works, I probably would have thought I had something to do with it. Plastic lobsters. My parents had 2 kids before I was born. My mother drowned them in a bathtub during a psychotic episode. Somehow, despite this, and a prior history of mental illness, she got released, had me a couple years later. They had another child just before I turned 2, but I never laid eyes on her. Neither of them ever fessed up though. I only found out about their existence after an aunt died, left me her personal effects. I found birth announcements for these other kids in her mementos. I always thought she meant for me to find them. When I asked my parents, they refused to discuss anything related to these kids. A few years later, I went back to my hometown and looked up that date in the newspaper morgue. The friend who went with me was floored. I wasn't really. I'd grown up in fear for my life from her rages. I broke off contact with them as soon as I could. Not just because of this, though it didn't help. I had a slew of my own traumas growing up. It was a huge mistake to let them try to raise another child. Thea 1. Dude, here's a family story I refer to as the accident. For years my older sister's bio dad died in an accident when she was 8. She didn't find out until she was a teenager that it wasn't a car accident. It was a painted the ceiling with his brain accident. Anyway, fast forward 30-some years and my sister deals with a fuckload of mental issues, and is constantly treating her children poorly. It's Easter Sunday and our younger sister is introducing her boyfriend to our family, and it's his first meal with us. Think modern Norman Rockwell style all-out meals but with a bunch of kids and family. But my older sister won't stop yelling at her kids. My dad, who has been her only active father, finally snaps and tells her to knock it off. She, a 40-something-year-old woman, pulls the "you're not my dad" line like a shitty teenager. That man goes from calm to red, stands up, veins bulging from his head, and absolutely screams, "Yeah, your fucking child molester dad blew his fucking head off. He never had to deal with your bullshit." And that's how everyone in our family found out what the accident really was, and why it happened. The Gooch assassin. I always thought my 2 older brothers got addicted to drugs because of their own decisions and the people they hung out with. It turns out that my dad had been feeding them pills since they were about 10 to shut them up. For years I held resentment against them for not being good older brothers like they should have, only to find out that it was my father, who I had praised all those years, that was truly evil. Edit. Wow. I wasn't expecting all of this, lol. Just to address some of the comments, my brothers are doing mostly fine now. Both struggled but eventually found sobriety. Luckily enough, the family didn't give up on them. We have a pretty good relationship now, and none of us hold anything against each other. We realize that none of us are to blame for the sins of our father. Not sure where dad is, no contact for about a decade now. In contrast, mom was and still is an angel. With her showing me who to be and my dad showing me exactly who not to be, I think I turned out pretty okay. A lot of the time the cycle just continues, but my brothers and I managed to break it. I'm sorry to everyone who has gone through something similar. Thank you for sharing your stories as well. Hope everyone finds peace someday. Love you. Dufferum. Why the neighbors moved. Trigger warning for violent crime. I was pretty young when this happened, so the details won't be perfect, but the story is otherwise true. I grew up in a coastal town and we had some neighbors whom I really liked. My parents were friends with them, their kids were roughly my age. Wonderful. We played together all the time. One day they very suddenly moved. I was a bit confused as there had been no clue that they were going. I remember some police cars and the moving vans weeks later, but that was it. My mother told me that the kid's grandmother had become very ill. The cops came to tell the family and they left emergently to care for her, and never came back. I was only about 5 and seemed legit. Many years later, as an adult, and long since moved away from that area, my parents and I were reminiscing over our old home. I mentioned that I wondered what had happened to them. That's when my mom told me the truth. The parents had gone out that night on a date, and left the kids with a 14-year-old babysitter. When they returned home, they found the sitter murdered. Someone had broken into the home, and then killed the sitter. My mom stated the cops think the sitter pretended to be the only one home to protect the kids. When the parents got home, they checked the kids were safe and set them back to sleep. The police obviously immediately came. Once the kids were hard asleep, the parents picked them up, put blankets over their heads, asked the cops to be silent as they walked them out, and took them out of the house. They gave the kids the same story my parents told me. Grandma was sick and they were going to live with her. Grandma dutifully played along with the ruse for several weeks until the parents could find a new home to live in. The kids were kept unaware of what had happened just mere feet from them, as they didn't want the kids to be forever terrified of it happening again. Not sure if the kids ever eventually figured out the truth of that one. Sitternet. The coal too. I knew my grandfather was a coal miner, and that he was really involved with the union, but it wasn't till after he died that I found out just how much of a union man he was. If something needed blowing up or someone needed to not be breathing anymore, they called Gramps. After he died, my brother remembers some men coming to visit Gran, and giving her a lot of envelopes. She took off for a year-long vacation in Europe after that. Edit for all the people saying my Gramps was a great man, thank you for the kind thoughts, but seeing something you think is cool on Reddit is not the reality. He wasn't a good husband, and he wasn't a great father to 3 of his daughters, although he loved my mama very much, as well as me and my brothers and cousins. Being a violent person for good reasons does not make you a good person. It just makes you a means to an end. Plurper and a pizza. That day, my mother grew up in the American South. Her brother died in his early 20s and she always told me it was a freak accident. A bullet came through the window killing him. They lived in a rural area, so I never questioned it. One year I inherited an old Korean War officer's sword after my grandpa passed. My mom freaked out and told me that it was too dangerous to keep, and that we should sell it, or get a safe to lock it up in. I thought it was weird, so I asked my dad, and he got this sad look on his face. Turns out my mom's brother was brutally murdered with a similar sword in the 80s. He had gotten involved with some drug dealers, and they thought he had snitched about one of their big deals that got busted. No idea why they decided to use a sword, but it was pretty fucked up to hear about. My mom had to ID the body. I found this out when I was 16, but she never directly acknowledged it until years later. My mom said he was just trying to make some extra cash by introducing people who partied to the dealers. I'm about his age now, and I can see how he just thought he was making a quick buck. Never thinking something like that would get him killed. Weirdness. When I turned 21, my grandfather told me a story about his older brother that I had never heard. My great-uncle was a big boozer for most of his life. He passed at 92. And by then had switched from liquor to beer and wine. He also cut down to 1 pack of cigarettes a day, instead of 2, after he had half a lung removed. And my uncle grew up on a farm in the 30s and 40s. Mostly the family ran the farm by themselves, but from time to time they would hire drifters on as farm hands. In 1950, my uncle and one of the farm hands were out drinking, and they were driving back to the farm in my uncle's convertible. My uncle was the one driving and he misjudged a turn that had a steep bank on the right side. He ran the car up the embankment, which was steep enough to flip it. My uncle was thrown from the car, but the farmhand he was drinking with was only halfway out of the car when it landed. Pap said he was severed clean into 2 pieces, because the farmhand was just a drifter without any family to make much fuss, and because the Korean War had just started. My uncle was able to enlist and avoid any criminal charges. He was in Korea until the end of the war. That was the only time I've ever heard that story told. And although I would never be someone who has more than a few drinks before getting behind the wheel, it's something that definitely sticks in my mind. And it's a story I'll tell my own kids when they get their license. Second story. My fiancé has been getting very close with a new female coworker. I talked to him about it privately and he informed her. Was I wrong to bring it up? Throw away because we check Reddit together. As the title suggests, my 32F fiancé 36M and I have recently had a discussion about me feeling a little insecure in our relationship. He is a very kind and charismatic man, and we have been together for 4 years, engaged and living together for 1 year. We have never had major issues like this before, because we have always been transparent with one another. 2 months ago, a new girl 24F began working at his office. She is very young and based on our limited interactions, seems generally good-hearted, but I kept having a growing feeling that something was off. He had been coming home every day raving about her, and how nice it is to have someone in the office who understands and laughs at his jokes. It seemed like an innocent work friendship, but he started to give me other details from their conversations that had me concerned. For instance, she would announce to him when she was ovulating or starting her period as an excuse for being grumpy or overly touchy. She began describing, in detail, all of the sexual encounters she has had since moving to our city, and he was relaying some of these stories back to me as if they were exciting work stories. 2 weeks ago, I met her for the first time at a company dinner. I told her it was nice to finally meet her after hearing so much about her. She smiled, ignored me, and began talking to my fiancé about how different I was from her expectations. The next week, she had apparently been talking a lot at work about how pretty she thought I was, and how lucky my partner and I are to have found one another. It felt strange that she had a lot to say about me, but didn't even speak to me when we had a chance to interact. I chalked it up to being nervous or shy. Last week, my fiancé came home with a very detailed story that she told him about a failed sexual encounter, seeking advice. I felt very uncomfortable with this, and let him know that, while it's likely just my insecurity, I don't trust this sort of behavior. He told me to give it time, and once I get to know her, I'll see it's completely innocent. She asked him to meet up with her over the weekend, and he went so far as to arrange a meeting without telling me until the day before. We had originally made dinner plans with my parents, and he told me he would come later on, because he needed to meet with her to discuss her relationship problems. I very passionately told him that this is not okay, and he canceled his plans with her, adding that it was cute, and that I was getting so jealous of her. We had a short chat about it later, and he said he would establish some distance. This Monday after work, she called his personal phone. She said he had not sent her any jokes at work that day, and she wanted to know why. I told him he needed to set boundaries, immediately. It's fine to be friendly with people in the office, but it really felt excessive that she was calling because he was enacting some kind of boundaries. I was upset that he had given her access to a private communication line as well. He said he would just tell her he was busy with work, and the thought of sending jokes didn't cross his mind. And I thought that would be the end of the conversation. Today he came home from work sulking and refused to talk with me. Eventually he told me that he explained to her that I was feeling insecure about how close their friendship had become, and she said that she didn't want to make me uncomfortable, so she said she wouldn't speak to him, at all, anymore. He was crying and told me that she's just like a younger sister, he's an only child, and he was happy that she trusted him, but he was forced to end the relationship because of me. I apologized and told him that I had expected him to keep my feelings private and adjust his behavior, rather than telling her everything. He said that would be dishonest, and he didn't want to distance himself from her without making her aware of the situation. I asked him why it was so important for him to discuss very personal and NSFW topics with a younger woman that he has only known for 2 months. He angrily expressed to me that I'm trying to police his joy, and said that I'm just upset that he's been too happy since meeting her. He said I should have never brought it up. I feel that him telling all of this to his coworker is a breach of my trust in him. He is convinced that I ruined their relationship by being jealous. I feel really bad because he was very happy at work, and was happy about joking around and having lunch with her, but he said that because of me, they can't have any kind of relationship at all. Was my expression of feeling insecure the catalyst? Should I have kept this to myself? Edit. Thank you all for your advice, and particularly for the articles about emotional affairs. I am going to have a discussion with him tonight, and be completely honest about my feelings and go over some of the signs. I'll let you know how it goes. Update. We discussed the situation one-on-one, and he agreed that he was very much in the midst of an emotional affair, but claimed that it just felt good to have attention from someone at work. He said it might be a good idea to hear perspectives from some of his coworkers, so I reached out to 2 of them, and I asked what they thought of the relationship. One coworker said it was obvious what was happening, and they didn't want to get involved, because they didn't want to be the one to break that news to me. Another coworker said that he witnessed some of their conversations, and this is just the way people in the office chat. My fiancé clung to that last opinion and started making excuses again, so we had the emotional affair conversation all over again. He said this is too emotionally charged for him to make a decision right now. I told him that I do not lack that capacity, so he gets 24 hours to sort out his priorities and have a heart-to-heart with me, otherwise he can go live with his work wife. Update 2. I sent him this post while he was at work. He read the comments and took them to heart. My fiancé came home from work with flowers. crying heavily. I told him that this woman would try to speak with him behind my back, and she did. He realized everything I told him and what he read here was true. He apologized for not acknowledging my feelings. He said that I am the greatest thing that happened to him, and he doesn't want to lose me over this situation. He will be calling a therapist next week for him to begin private sessions. We will move to couples therapy from that point. We haven't set a date for the wedding, so we will continue the engagement without rushing anything. Thank you so much, everyone, for your advice. I was able to feel support from this community that I wasn't getting elsewhere. I'm eternally grateful, and I have hope that he will be able to turn this situation around.